We've got some bad news for you, I'm afraid. One of the most effective socialist conspiracies we had going has been rumbled. The detective work was done by none other than the Conservative MP for Don Valley, Nick Fletcher.
Will the leader please set aside some time in this House for a debate on the international socialist concept of so-called 15-minute cities and 20-minute neighbourhoods? Ultra-low emission zones in their present form do untold economic damage to any city. However, the second step after these zones will take away personal freedoms as well. Sheffield is already on this journey, and I do not want Doncaster, which is also a Labour-run socialist council, to do the same. Low emission zones cost the taxpayer money, simple as. However, 15-minute cities will cost us our personal freedom, and that cannot be right.
That was the remarkably charismatic Nick Fletcher exposing the international plot to install low-emission zones, 15-minute cities, and 20-minute neighbourhoods around the country and the world. Now, if you weren't aware of the secretive plans, 15-minute cities are the idea of designing urban environments so that most daily necessities and services such as work, shopping, education, health, and leisure should be easily reachable within 15 minutes, either by walking or on a bike. The 20-minute neighbourhood is a variation on the theme, so 20 minutes instead of 15 minutes. I'd go for 15 minits, but I'd settle for 20 minutes, I suppose. Aaron, why is a Conservative MP standing up in Parliament and, suggesting he's exposing this international socialist plan to make cities walkable?
Well, of course, Michael, if you look at page 326 of the Penguin version of Capital Volume 2, Marx is extraordinarily specific about the need for 15-minute cities. It's repeated throughout the canon of leftist thinking in the 19th century, Proudhon, Bakunin, all the way through then to the 20th century, Benjamin and Antonio Gramsci. Talk about the need to be able to walk around your town or city. Of course, Michael, being serious, this is absurd, it's nutty, and it's being said by this Conservative MP precisely because they have no governing agenda of their own. These people are only against things. The whole point of a 15-minute city, a 15-minute neighbourhood, is that we basically return to the kind of urban configuration you see before the 1960s and the creation of mass highways running right through cities, right? You saw it in Glasgow, you saw it in Manchester, you saw it particularly in New York. Robert Moses, very famous for it, was very bad. It could have been far worse. It was stopped by people like Jane Jacobs, basically demolishing whole communities. The Bronx, a very famous one, and just putting a massive motorway right through the middle of it. And I thought Conservatives liked the world before the 1960s, Michael. I thought they wanted to go back to tradition as they see it. But apparently when it comes to urban environments, being able to walk to places or cycle or just a short trip to go to vital places like, your work and your school and your GP, and to be able to get basic groceries and whatnot. Apparently not. Apparently, if we go back to the world as it was before the 1960s, as it was basically for the entirety of human history, that's a Marxist conspiracy. I can't wait for this man to no longer be in Parliament. There are just so many fools like him in the Houses of Parliament as a result of the 2019 general election, purely because they stood on Brexit. And they went to communities that voted Leave and they said, we'll deliver Brexit. And he's now been voted in, and he's an MP, or many other ones too. And they haven't the slightest idea about how to make the country better for most people. And so they rally against completely nonsensical stuff like this. You know what? Let's do the Conservative thing and make it harder to get around this city. Let's make your quality of life even worse. I promise that'll be my number one electoral pledge. More traffic jams. Come on, the man's an idiot.
Now, I have an admission to make. I misled you a little bit, actually, at the beginning of this section, because I said it was Nick Fletcher who did the detective work in uncovering this socialist conspiracy. In fact, he's not the first guy to come up with this theory, and he was drawing upon a broader right-wing paranoia about walkable cities.
You will only have 15 minutes of freedom here in the UK. So let me tell you the plan. The plan is in Oxford, and this has just been passed by the council, to divide the city here into, a bit of a squiggly city, into 6 parts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you will only have the freedom to operate in the part that you live. So if this is you, the idea is that everybody will live within 15 minutes of the things they need. 15 minutes of a school, 15 minutes of a doctor's, 15 minutes of a supermarket. And if you want to travel to the other zones in your city, or maybe soon your town, you will have to go out an approved route. You will have to journey around the outside of the city in order to re-enter another section of the city. This plan is supposed to be saving the planet. And the idea is that you won't simply be able to cross over into other sections of your city anymore. So if your mother, for example, lived over here, you wouldn't be able to just go across and see her. This would all be done via e-gates, electronic gates, and number plate recognition. You in your area will only be allowed within that 15-minute zone that you've been allocated. The number plate recognition will know if you leave your zone. And you can apply for permission, a permit to leave your zone and travel to another zone. But you'll only be allowed to do this about 100 times a year. This is real. I just have to stop and say that. This has actually been passed by Oxford Council. This is happening in the next 2 years, 2024, it begins.
What Katie Hopkins is talking about there is a traffic management scheme, right? There are no Berlin walls being erected to stop people going from one part of Oxford City to another part. No, this is managing which roads traffic goes down. This does have legs, though. Lots of people have been talking about this. And in response to a big uproar, in part stoked by the likes of Katie Hopkins, I'm sure there are also some general concerns among Oxford residents. In response to those, Oxford City Council released this statement clarifying the nature of the scheme. This is how they reassured residents. The traffic filters work in exactly the same way as the existing traffic cameras in High Street and are widely used in cities across the UK to manage congestion and support public transport. Residents will still be able to drive to every part of the city at any time, but in the future, during certain times of the day, you may need to take a different route. For example, using the ring road. That's if you want to travel by car. The reason we have proposed these changes is because, as everyone who lives and visits Oxford knows, the city has had awful congestion for decades. This is damaging both our economy and our environment and is making the bus network unviable. Our aim is to reduce traffic levels and congestion, make the buses faster and more reliable, and make cycling and walking safer and more pleasant. Those reassurances, though, were not enough to stop the controversy going international. 2 weeks after that statement, Jordan Peterson tweeted this: "The idea that neighborhoods should be walkable is lovely. The idea that idiot, tyrannical bureaucrats can decide by fiat where you're allowed to drive is perhaps the worst imaginable perversion of that idea. And make no mistake, it's part of a well-documented plan." That plan, as you can see from the quoted tweet there, is the Great Reset. That's the idea that a liberal global elite wants to control and surveil us all under the pretense of combating climate change and COVID-19. Aaron, I suppose before we talked about what this says about the Tory MP speaking about it in Parliament, I mean, here, I suppose I want you to comment on the broader cultural phenomenon. Is this going to be a significant new front in the culture war? And how much legs will it have? Particularly, I suppose, pitching car drivers against people who want pedestrianised cities.
Well, it's fucking stupid, so presumably it will be, Michael. Presumably it'll be front and centre of our politics for the next 25 years. I mean, that seems to be the way of the world. What Katie Hopkins is rallying against there, she says there are going to be 6 parts of the city. You're describing city quarters. Those have literally existed since we had cities, okay? You go to Florence, there are multiple quarters. You go to Paris, there are multiple quarters. You're describing a city before the 1960s that you can't just drive right through the city centre. That's how cities work. Now, you can say it's a good thing. We shouldn't go back. It's fine. But the idea it's part of some Machiavellian, top-down, global conspiratorial revolution overseen by socialist World Economic Forum elites is painfully wrong. Okay, we're going back purely to how cities and towns were configured until 60 years ago. That doesn't make sense to me. And on Jordan Peterson's point, Michael, the idea, I'm not even going to do his voice, but listen, Sonny Jim, he does these weird, archaic, Anglo-Canadian phrases. The idea that, I don't know how, the phrase you said, Michael, that bureaucrats can manage traffic. Well, yes, that's what they do, Jordan. Can you imagine if this chap was around and he was driving cars and all of a sudden somebody invented traffic lights and roundabouts and zebra crossings? He would say, you're inhibiting my liberty. How dare you put a traffic light there? You're managing the traffic. You're stopping my motion where I want to go. You're inhibiting my freedom. They would. These people would rally against one-way streets, traffic lights, parking meters, presumably parking spots, any kind of traffic management, signs. I mean, it's completely nutty. Often with these, and they are on the far right, these people. I think John Peterson is adjacent to lots of people on the far right, frankly. Particularly, I think, indisputably on this issue. Katie Hopkins is on the far right. Sometimes they'll say things and you think, okay, there's a kernel of truth. There's something interesting here. Okay, so with the vaccine passports, there was a genuine civil liberties debate around whether or not somebody's freedom of movement should be curtailed because they've not accepted a vaccine. Right? We can have that conversation. Some people think one thing, some people think another. There is a genuine civil liberties debate to be had, and you have to balance the interests and the arguments. This is not true here, okay? People don't want to have to, drive for an hour to work. Commutes are far too long. And if you said to most people, I want to reduce your commute, I want to make it easier to find parking where you live. We want fewer cars on the road. So if you do need to drive, you're a tradesperson, you've got a large family, whatever, it'll make life easier for you too. Okay? I want to make it easier for you to be able to stay in touch with your elderly relatives. I want it to be easier for your kids to be able to walk to school. Right now, you only want them to do it when they're 14, 15. What if we could do it in such a way they could start doing safely when they're 11, 12? Most people go, okay, interesting. How do we do that? And again, they might not agree with the conclusions, but it's a debate they'd be up for. And the objectives are certainly very alluring and appealing. But if you listen to Katie Hopkins, no, we want our children to drive. That's it. The parent can drive the kid to school. The longer, the better. The more inefficient the journey, the better. The more traffic jams, the bigger the smile. This is madness. This is absolute madness. And like I say, it's people who don't have a political agenda of their own. And I think conservatism, really with the collapse of capitalist growth, which is what we're seeing, by the way. Park that. It's a big word I've just said there. Park that for another day. But we're seeing lower economic growth decade on decade. We've seen in an ever expanding number of countries what are being called lost decades. So there's no economic growth from the neoliberal economic model, right? There's no rising living standards. And so these people don't have a proposition or political project. They don't. And actually the best critics of it are coming from the left. So they have to invent whole new spheres where they can do politics and be propositional. And it means they're having to reach desperately forever more insane stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that all LTNs are good, right? Sometimes local government will put a cycle path in somewhere and it doesn't work and the electorate doesn't like it and they have to get rid of it again. That's life. That's democracy. I get it. But the ambition of having cities where you can basically access all the things you need within 15, 20 minutes, I think actually every sensible person wants that.